the Supreme Court has announced that it will decide whether or not Donald Trump has presidential immunity from prosecution, just generally. They've decided they'll take up the case. They could have dismissed it out of hand, and that would have meant that the trial would have been on track to take place before the 2024 general election. Now, this delays it significantly because the Supreme Court will be hearing arguments the week of April 22nd. And then they'll have to make a decision probably in June. And that is exactly what Trump wanted, because that means that the judge will not be able to hold a trial in time, most likely, for the election. Now, this could potentially change, but legal experts say it would be very difficult. The earliest, it seems like a trial on this particular case, the Jack Smith federal election interference probe, the earliest it appears it could even happen would be October. So because of the circus of the election, it seems overwhelmingly likely that this will have to happen after the election. And so the fact that they're even taking this case up is a huge, huge win for Donald Trump, because the claims that he's making are so unconstitutional on their face. Like, I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to rule in his favor. This is their way to have it both ways. They can help their buddy out, the guy that put them on the Supreme Court, the party that put them on the Supreme Court, the party that they're ideologically aligned with, while at the same time not giving the president immunity from all criminal justice. It's like the most unconstitutional thing on its face. So the DC Circuit Court had already shut this down. Trump appealed, and the Circuit Court decision was incredibly clear. But here's Supreme Court analyst Joan Biskrivik. She reacted here on CNN to the news, the breaking news, and this was her assessment.
But the fact that they delayed even this order that basically just says we're going to take it up, that they delayed it for 2 weeks, suggests that they certainly did not embrace the urgency that Special Counsel Jack Smith tried to impose upon them way back in December, when Jack Smith went to the Supreme Court and said, Justices, please take up this case now so that we can get a clear answer. This is yours to answer. And then, once the Supreme Court said, no, we're not coming in, and the DC Circuit ruled, that was another several weeks. So former President Trump's effort to run the clock has a partner in the Supreme Court at this point, even though, Jake, probably in the end, the justices will agree with the D.C. Circuit and reject former President Donald Trump's claim of absolute immunity. But what good will that do for any kind of trial before we're really into the heat of this next presidential election?
That is quite aligned with my reading on this as well. There's been in the past not this claim of total immunity. I mean, it's not, as I said, not in the Constitution. It's just made up by Trump, just made up that he has legal immunity from criminal prosecution because he's the king. Oh, I mean, the president. Oh, and apparently he's still the president, even though he lost the election. Running for a third term. Shouldn't disqualify me, because they stole it from me. Isn't this your third term, Mr. President? I thought you're still the shadow guy, or I'm having trouble keeping track of the conspiracy theories, Bradley.
Well, it's kind of it's almost the parallel to sort of like the Biden crime family aspect. That like Biden is like this doddering old man, but also the ringleader of a extremely intricate crime syndicate.
Yeah.
And then on the other end, it's like Trump, because he was president, but also in some people's minds, and maybe his own, is still or should be president. He was spurned from his rightful presidency, should be immune from any potential criminal liability. But because the doddering old man crime syndicate leader is the so-called president, he needs to be punished and can't be immune from
That is
criminal
amazing.
prosecution.
Yes.
So it's also that's the other I think contortion that they have to do, which is that Trump desperately needs presidential immunity for some communal reason,
Right.
for some countrywide
Right.
national reason.
For the Constitution.
But presumably the second he gets in office, based on every single other public statement he's ever made, he's going to prosecute all of his political rivals, including the former president, if Biden was the former president.
I'm old
in
enough.
this
I'm old
circumstance.
enough to remember lock her up. Lock her up.
Right.
Lock her up.
And
right.
yet presidential immunity is it's like existentially important to Trump, and also even Trump in some of his statements says like, for all presidents, not just me. Does that include Joe Biden, the guy you're very expressly like, I want to throw in jail?
Yes, it's
like,
Biden. It's anybody who opposed him. Like, I mean, he's spoken about broadly his political opponents, but even that claim, like it was, I hate immigrants, I hate Muslims, and I hate Hillary Clinton and think she's a criminal. And then, like, in the lead up to that election, Fox News was saying that even though Comey and the FBI was not going to charge her, that there was not going to be like criminal charges from the FBI or from the DOJ about this. Even with that, they said, well, she's going to obstruct further charges into her, and this is why she's such a criminal. The guy is now taking it to the Supreme Court and has stacked the Supreme Court with judges who are going to help him out. And this is the exact scenario that they claimed Hillary Clinton was going to do when she was anointed as the president in 2016, that Trump is doing in practice right now.
Yeah, it's not a novel observation on my end here, but it's like if you substituted Donald Trump's name for like a more ethnic or global South sounding name,
yes,
and say this was happening in like the Central African Republic or something like
right.
that. This would just be like a little brief news chyron of like, oh, look at this hilariously corrupt thing going on in a far-flung part of the world.
Totally. Third world. What are you going to do about it, right?
Where a former president is seeking re-election, saying the election was stolen from him. He's appointed 3 Supreme Court justices to tip the scales to hopefully render him completely immune from criminal prosecution. People would just be like, yep, things are
totally.
destabilizing over there.
It's so corrupt over there. And then you'll have Eric Prince come on TV and say, well, we got to recolonize Africa.
Yeah,
we've got to do it. And like, this is also not a novel thing to bring up, but the Supreme Court has ruled on a similar issue before in Nixon's instance. Back in 1974, the justices, it was the Warren Court, right? So it's more liberal, but Rehnquist was on that court, a very conservative justice. It was a unanimous decision where they decided that Nixon, who was claiming that he had executive privilege, and so they should not be able to use the sensitive information, the tapes that recorded him basically, walking through the crimes that they were going to commit, that should not be allowed to be consumed or used as evidence because, or it should be confidential for national security purposes. And he said that this was covered under executive privilege. And again, as I mentioned, the court ruled unanimously against him. Oh, I should correct myself. Rehnquist actually recused himself. Sorry. Correcting myself. Rehnquist did not rule in that instance, but he was still on the court. And, Clarence Rehnquist recused himself because he had ties to the Nixon administration. So it actually is quite fascinating because Clarence Thomas's wife is deeply aligned with the Trump administration and the MAGA movement, and that has been delineated many times. You think Clarence Thomas is going to recuse himself? You think Clarence Thomas is going to recuse himself from this case? I think not. So this is quite bad news. But it's not news that anyone should be surprised by. The Supreme Court is immensely important, and it's paying dividends for Trump and the Republicans that they were so aggressive, so laser focused on the judiciary, and we are facing the effects of that and will be facing the effects of that for decades and decades to come.